And so that's the sort of type of things that we're wanting to focus in on. You know, some corporate companies will say that people don't care about their privacy. The research shows they actually really do, but they feel disempowered. So if our adults are feeling disempowered, how might our children feel going into that environment? Or maybe actually our students aren't as aware as we are. Maybe, you know, they've been indoctrinated into the system already. So what's their sort of awareness level? You know, maybe they are the frog in the slow-boiled Google pot. I better hand it over to you before I say anything too controversial.
Yes, we might not mention particular brands as we go through, but it's an interesting space, and there's a growing discussion internationally around, and it's more kind of asking questions than coming down on decisions, but growing questions around the growth of particular platforms and particular organisations in the education sector, not just in New Zealand, but in the US and in the UK and so on. And people just asking questions around, you know, how do we feel about jumping wholeheartedly into commitments with large organisations? What are the questions, what are the issues around how student data is managed? There's been things in the news, there are questions being asked in schools. This session may not come up with a particular straight answer, but there may be some things that come out from discussions this morning around what are the so whats for schools to be thinking around at the board level, leadership level and student level as well. So,
yeah, I've just put that here because I think that's, if we can keep coming back to that focus, that would be quite useful. So I've just popped it there.
Okay, so this is how we thought that we would roll the session. There are a few people in the room who we have spoken to before today who have indicated that they have a story or a perspective that they would particularly like to share. We'll call on those people first in a second, looking at Evie, who I know is going to also speak in a moment. But then we'll throw the discussion open to all of you in the room, and we'll have to keep moving the microphones around because of course we need to make sure we capture all your wonderful comments and ideas for the live stream that's going out from NetHui. And we'll just work our way through these two large questions before we come to the so what for us this morning. So, would you like to introduce Evie?
Okay, so this is, so at our school, student voice is really, really important. So we have one of our students here today, and her name is Evie, and she is 11, and she's very, very bravely said that she will talk to us about how she feels about you know, more and more of her work and the content that she's doing at the school actually moving onto that online space.
I feel kind of unsafe online because I know that everyone can see it, and that makes me feel kind of unsure if I want my work online. But there are some good things about having my work online, like having lots of different people comment on it and getting lots of different views on my work. And we've started up a blog post at school, and it's open to everybody, and we're getting lots and lots of different comments in it, and I'm really enjoying getting those comments in and working on my work better. And I know how to keep my stuff safe online, but I don't really think that it helps much. And I don't remember them that well, not because it wasn't explained well, it's just because it's really complex and I don't feel like I have enough practice with it. And that's what I think about having my work online.
Thank you, Evie. That was wonderful. And actually, I think it seems really pertinent to have started off with the voice of actually the person who's actually at the heart of these.
Really interested in the fact that adolescents now are still developing the way that you and I did when we were young, back then. But it's happening in a completely new context. And what does that mean? You know, like, so they're still finding out who they are. They're still creating relationships that are going to last their whole life. But they're doing it in a new context. And the other thing is that they're never switching off. And so what does that mean? So I'm more interested in question 2, which is, yes, we can do a whole bunch of stuff to protect our students and our kids. But more importantly, how are we empowering themselves to protect themselves? You know, like, how can we teach them to stay, you know, like these phishing scams and stuff like that? So that's kind of what I'm more interested in. I know there's a whole bunch of things going on in the first question, so. But yeah, so that's my research.
Thanks, Sharpa. And just one more statement. I'll call on Martin to just give us maybe the point of view from NetSafe, who do a huge amount of work in schools right across New Zealand, to just the perspective that NetSafe hold in this particular space. And then we're going to throw the discussion open to the room. So, Martin.
Yes, I'd like to talk about digital citizenship and cyberbullying. You've given me the microphone, so you've made that mistake. So NetSafe sees breaches and attacks on privacy of data held by schools on a regular basis, both at that sort of macro level, that school networks come under attack and people, you know, attempt to steal student data, you know, right through to sort of, I guess, frontline mistakes where, you know, schools don't have the expertise to set up, you know, public systems and maintain and get the outcome that they actually sought to protect, but share data in an appropriate way. So I can say that from NetSafe's perspective, it's a very real issue. You know, a lot of stuff happening, and you know, that's probably my contribution. Also on cyberbullying.
That's great, thank you. And just one final thing to add, and I mentioned at the start that I'm working with core education. There's 2 or 3 folk in the room who are also involved in the Connected Learning Advisory, which is a national support. It's provided by the Ministry of Education for schools to help schools think about and manage technology in this particular space. And it's really just to concur with the earlier comments that we have seen an increasing number of schools put their hands up for help and support to work out really how to plan and manage issues related to the management of data, use of data, questions around privacy and so on. So this is a timely session, and we might hear from 1 or 2 of those folk in a moment. So, open to the floor. The first question for us to explore over the next few minutes is up here on the board. So what do we see in this room, folks who are here, as the areas of opportunity and challenge facing schools in relation to data management? It's a good time to share a few stories of what you're seeing in your own context as well. And Chrissy's going to be our wonderful mic runner this morning. So if we can make sure, if we just introduce, say who we are before we share our thoughts. So over to you.
So I'm Dave Lane. I'm president of the New Zealand Open Source Society, and I'm also working with the Open Education Resources Foundation. And the concern that I have, I'm very interested in privacy issues, particularly related to children in school, because I have some, is the idea that there's a what I perceive to be a very strongly misplaced trust in some of the organizations that we're entrusting with our students' data. There is a headlong rush into leaving one corporation based in the US for another corporation based in the US, with the data all being stored in the US and not in our jurisdiction, so subject, for example, to the Patriot Act in America. And there's also substantial concern that I have over the assignment of rights to the data that our students, our learners, are putting online with the naive thought that it will be used for benign purposes only. And it's also very concerning to me that the challenge that a lot of our young people are experimenting with their persona. They exhibit that online in various ways, and some of those things they might regret in years to come, but the internet does not forget. And so my concern is just that we are actually aiding and abetting our students by the kind of relationships we build with basically overseas corporations, exactly the ones that we're trying to avoid having take over New Zealand with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, for example. We're headlong rushing into giving them all of our most important precious data.
Thanks, Dave. Is there anyone else who wants to also speak to that topic, or echoes Dave's view or concerns around particular challenges that we're seeing in schools? I can see a few nodding heads. people who concur, indicate if you'd like to add to that thought. Thanks, Nevin. Chrissy.
Hi, Nevin. Not speaking to Dave's point at all. Sorry. I'm just looking at how we get our kids involved. Like, I'm a big fan of saying, you know, I love the term cyber smart rather than cyber safety. Kids want to be smart, but safety's kind of a very adult word. So when Evie's talking, I'm sitting there translating it in my head as authentic audience. I don't have any answers to this. What is the language that we can use? Like, privacy is very unsexy, very uncool. Do we have suggestions for tailoring that language to get kids more aware of the issues here?
Thanks, Nevin. And I think over at the back, Mike's got a comment. Certainly the way we position, I mean, I think the topic of this session is quite provocative, and there's certainly some loaded language in the title, designed to get you talking, just as it already has. Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike. So I helped to organise KiwiCon, which is a hacker conference that happens in Wellington. And part of what we're trying to do this year is to do some free training for students and hopefully teachers. It's totally unplanned, and I'm now announcing it to the internet, which is a bit scary. But so I kind of am here to get ideas from you as to how we can develop this training program. It's totally, unplanned, as I said. We want to educate our kids. We want to help grow little, hackers that can not necessarily break things or break things for good reasons, but into InfoSec, basically. So maybe it's part of question 2, but yeah, we want to offer some training. We'll have some trainers available in Wellington. It'll be in December. What do you want them to learn?
Cool, thanks, Mike. And I think actually, it's as we move the discussion, we may well come circling back towards that, because one of the things that we as a room might agree on is that a key response is helping. How do we help learners build their own capability to manage their own privacy and security? It was certainly something that came up this morning from Catherine Brown, and she talked about individuals taking responsibility for their own safety and security. So what does that mean in terms of, do we see opportunities and challenges there for our young people? Andrew first, and then over to you.
Hi there, I'm Andrew from Core Education. I guess one of the opportunities I'm interested in exploring is the school being a place where terms and conditions can be rewritten, modeled in plain English, because a lot of it comes down to everyone feeling buried under the rhetoric, I think. And I wonder if schools are a place where you can create an agreement that's transparent, so that there's a transparency about what happens to your data from the very beginning. So the things that you mentioned, which I really want to share, but I also want to know a little bit about how far is this information possible, how far is it possible to travel? So I'm curious about people in the room, organizations that maybe aren't part of schools, how you treat personal information, or how much scope do you give people as far as what happens to your data, and doing that in a way that's not just kind of in legal speak. That is kind of the default position, I think, of probably most companies or organizations. So yeah.
Thank you. Were you going to talk on that same topic? Did you want to respond to Andrew there? Okay, I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you in a 2 seconds then. If you want to respond to Andrew, and then over to you. Yeah.
Part of my research took me to Singapore, and they have an international school there. And what I did, like a little focus group about, how can we get the students involved. And what they did is at the beginning of each term, they would sit down with their teachers and go, okay, like have a discussion about, okay, what's going to happen with our data, where are we putting it, who's seeing it, and just real transparency, and getting the kids involved in writing up an internet regulations, like together. So that kind of really translated, the official policy to how the students were seeing what's going to go on. So I think that really helps. I don't know if that happens in New Zealand schools. I haven't really been involved much, but Yeah.
Yeah, I can see people nodding. It certainly happened in the school where my my own children go. They have a co-constructed. That's at a user agreement level. There is a broader question here, which I think Andrew also raised, which is around the visibility across a school community when they sign up for, you know, an entire platform for use. You know, how clear are the terms and conditions for the school community, and do people understand what's happening to the data over time? Over to you.
My name's Leanne O'Donnell. I'm a policy lawyer from Australia, but I won't try and be legalistic. I think one of the areas of opportunity is learning from other sectors, that many of the issues that the education sector is facing, issues faced in other areas. So, for example, I've worked in aid and development in South Africa, and we faced some of the challenges that Dave talked about for example, an organisation would get a grant to do research, but that grant was tied to using a certain database or software that was proprietary. And when the money ran out after 3 years, then we lost that work. And a colleague I worked with called it renting out communities. So there's been some really interesting discussions in the aid and development sector as well about the dangers and the challenges of working with proprietary software that you might not own if that company goes bankrupt, or if you don't have the funding anymore for it. And I think one of the other areas of opportunity is similarly talking about doing collaborative privacy policies. Australia had new privacy laws last year, and when I was working at a telco, when we rewrote our privacy policy, I was the lawyer and made sure the company complied with the law, but it was written by the company, so the product people were involved. The technical people involved, everyone was really involved in a collaborative process of writing that together.
Cool, thank you. And I'll come over here to, oh, there you go. Over here to Ian, who had a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Andrew, Computers and Homes Technician for Taranaki area. I mainly deal with teaching of adults, but we have exactly the same issues with security, with their data that they want to put on. The sort of question I want to throw out there is, Ministry of Education normally gives us guidelines as to what we're doing. Surely there should be something from the ministry that is guiding towards what we should be doing with all of our schools, because in our small area we have 3 sort of main schools: a primary school that goes right up to intermediate, an intermediate school and a high school. They all use entirely different types of hardware and software, and of course storing that digitally, whether it be locally or offshore, is getting harder and harder to do, to keep it so it all flows together. I'm just wondering if somewhere there will be some discussion on what our government leaders are sort of pushing us towards.
It's a good question. I'm raking through my own mental Rolodex through all the kinds of advice that the advisory certainly gives to schools around this on behalf of the ministry, and I think it's an area that is ripe for further discussion, would be my diplomatic response there. I think that's a good question.
Hi, I'm Angela. I've been an educator for many years and raised 2 teenage daughters who are in their early 20s. So I've been teaching and I've been taught. This year doing my masters, and my research has been in pre-teens, the notions of privacy and practices of privacy in a general broad term, and what, if any, their relationships are to what they do online. So I think it's quite pertinent to the conversations in the room. We've got 2 kind of different sets of data we're talking about here. We've got the, what's school doing with kids' stuff, and then the concepts of students' sense of privacy. I just want to talk about pre-teens privacy and understanding what is privacy. We need to define it. In my research, these pre-teens defined it beautifully, and it started with most of their conceptions being around the concept of autonomy and control, and that is in a sense of themselves, what they do, and having the choice of making decisions. The second set of data was on their personal information and the confidentiality of that, or disclosure of it, and they were very specific about what that entailed. And then it went down into personal belongings and having ownership over things called personal space and solitude, and then the sense of self, body and physical. And in all of this was interrelated with all things online. So there was no distinction between an offline and an online world. When I asked them very generic, broad questions, what is privacy? They were tapped into it. The young people, I believe, are really tapped into the knowledge of what privacy means. But we are not making perhaps the connections in schools because I believe a lot of staff are battling the complexities of the net and the amount of change, let alone understanding things like, concepts of Google Docs and the issues around privacy and documentation of school-wide data. So all of these layers are complex. The greatest influence in the preteens' lives were their parents. And the next layer of that was schools and educational resources. And then the third layer was peers. So parents and family and whānau are incredibly important in translating what they're doing online around issues to do with privacy, safety and security. How well informed are our parents and what are we doing to support them? And those are the sort of layers that I'm really interested because they are the ones that help come back to the bigger issues of big data.
That's great. Thank you, Angela. And back over to Dave. I think what at the moment, just to kind of keep the focus around here, we're circling around a number of issues here related to both capability, kind of skills and the competencies needed to manage one's own data as a learner, the competencies and capabilities needed by educators to help support their learners, and the kind of the more technical issues related to the management and ownership of data at a school-wide and community level as well. So we'll just the next few minutes we'll just keep sharing these general observations that we're seeing in the room, and I do want to invite anyone who hasn't spoken yet to make sure that they either raise their hand or ask someone else to raise their question for them. Just the next couple of minutes, and then we might move on to the second question.
Okay, so just very quickly, just wanting to sort of touch on what Ian was asking about, and also maybe to be slightly controversial, which is something that's that doesn't happen with me very often. I just wanted to say that my concern is that we're putting our trust in the Ministry of Education to model security in such a way that, because if we teach our learners about security, be they adult learners or kids in school, if the institutions that are teaching them are exercising poor security judgment, what kind of modeling is that for the actual learners? And I would argue that we need to I personally think the Ministry of Education is way out of its depth, and that they're making very poor decisions on behalf of the learners in New Zealand. That's happening in a number of different areas. I would like us, as people who understand these problems, to actually call the ministry on this and to tell them why we think they need to change their approach.
I think you just did call them on it. And
thank you, Ministry. I'm waiting a call, yes.
No, that's great. Thanks, Dave. So we've got a question we've got a comment over here, and then down to here, and then across to here.
Well, I'm just going to continue with Dave's thought. So I used to work at the Ministry of Education, and I've just moved over to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and I couldn't agree more. I don't actually think the privacy expertise lies in the MOE to sort of issue that guidance about what tools are safe, what SMS vendors actually have agreements in place that protect, students' data. And I think there is a role for potentially us or another regulator to help them kind of co-construct guidance in this area and to make privacy far more easy and simpler to understand for, a parent coming in, like even something as simple as like a privacy tick on products that, we've tested. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And then further down the line as well.
Hello, my name's Lucy. I also am a chair of a school board and a privacy lawyer and advise a number of companies that provide services to schools and other sort of managed networks. And I guess if I think about your question itself and some of the issues facing schools with data management. There's a few topics that we haven't touched on that are quite big. So for example, one of them is where schools are going with BYOD policies. And I think that a number of schools are putting really strong systems around net filtering and security within their networks. But then if you've got a child that's bringing in their own device that has 3G capability, they can search whatever and wherever and do that surreptitiously on the sideline. And that's a security issue that I don't think schools have yet figured out how to grapple with. In terms of data management, the issues around the ministry and synchronising things sometimes also clash with what are really good workable students for schools. So you're 11, I think you said. So you're sort of at that stage where you're probably about to start into year 7 next year. And that means if you've been at a school that has given you this great email address and you've got all your Google Docs, you're going to lose it all. And next year you'll probably be at a new school with a new Google email account where you've suddenly lost all of your work. And as a student, that's really stink, you know, and that's not coordinated yet, and it's not something that schools are feeding through together to actually say, okay, you've built up a profile on, I don't know, Mathletics or Reading Eggs or TupPup or whatever sort of services you use, and you maybe really love some of those accounts and you might lose some of them, or it won't be a coordinated service. So I think we have thought of e-learning as the separate tool and sort of the safety and security that goes around it, but a lot of schools are moving to, we need to produce citizens that are fit for our environment, and that means they need to have physical tools and digital tools, and learning's just learning. It might take place in person, it might take place online, but let's give the best tools for that. And it's happening so fast that systems haven't caught up, but the security issues need to be balanced with workable solutions that mean that students have a really great learning experience and educational outcomes. And somehow one of the issues in the school I chair that we struggle with is our parents have very differing views around what digital services they're willing for us to sign up to. So how do we even go about getting parental consent? If we said we will only sign your student up to accounts that you've expressly ticked for, we might have, say, 50 or 60% of students that don't reply and then go, oh no, I was fine with it, I was happy for you to make that decision. Whereas we might have 1 or 2 that would be quite upset if they signed us up for something they hadn't expressly been talked through beforehand, and that there's no single answer on that. So anyway, that's some observations for what they're worth.
No, that's great, and I think there's a response actually to one of the things that you brought up behind. Clive, did you want to say something? Just while the mic goes round. And I think actually at the heart of a lot of this are the kinds of conversations that schools are having in their communities, and some schools I think would have, as students go through transition, we would see that break in service. In other schools, there's greater management right through from primary to secondary in different communities. But I think it depends. It's not consistent, I think, is a key thing there. That's all right. Clive, did you want to make a response?
Yeah, just in terms of so students moving from school to school. Quite commonly, and with large major platforms, we can download that data. So students are able to take that data at the end of the year, and I guess, you know, when you're choosing an online platform provider, maybe your example over here, you know, one of the criteria might well be that what happens when, you know, is who owns that data? Can you download it and take it away at any time?
Is it in a form that you can use is the other question as well. I'm going to take, okay, we've got a question here and one. And one at the back, and then what we'll do is we're going to move on to our final question as well. Certainly highlighting over here. Certainly highlighting that I think your comment about the speed at which things are moving, and there's a need for a bit of backward planning right across the school community around those issues that you raised. Over to you.
Hi there, it's great to be here. My name's Brittany from the Tertiary Education Commission. So I just started out in government this year, so it's been interesting to attend a workshop that the Ministry had a while ago about the review of the digital technologies curriculum, and so there the discussions really were about collaborating with partnerships such as the Microsoft Student Accelerator Program, NetSafe, and the wider community, just to upskill these teachers in digital literacy and digital privacy education. And so I think there certainly is a receptiveness in government to take on board the feedback in a kind of crowdsourcing kind of way about how the curriculum should be, and also not forgetting Māori and Pacifica students in the primary and tertiary sector and in Kura Kaupapa about how we can support their infrastructure and their computer systems.
Thank you. And we have a question or a comment over here, and then we're going to move into the last part of the discussion.
This comes as somebody from another generation and who really has some kind of reservations about what is actually available to the corporates that have been mentioned first of all by the gentleman from OSS. Back in March, The Guardian reported on a Belgian academic study that said that people without Facebook accounts, logged out users, and users who explicitly opt out of tracking are all being tracked. And in the home software Android phones with Facebook, which on an always on basis, once installed on a phone, Home takes over the lock screen and main display, turning it into a live feed of information, notifications and images Facebook users are sharing. While some will see that as goods, others will see that as a reservation. I'm not quite sure to what degree people are aware of that and really teach students when they do.
Thank you. Okay, so I think what we have been doing, and it's great participation from those of you here in the room, just sharing those different perspectives and the different stories that you're seeing, those of you from the education sector, from industry, with legal backgrounds and so on. So we've got a really great range of perspectives in here. It would be nice now to bring this session round to a kind of so what? So we're not just storytelling. That's a really great foundation to start from, but that this session can make some observations that turn into recommendations, things to take away. And so now it's 12:20, and Michelle was talking about us running into lunch. We may just run just slightly past 12:30. Is that? I'm going to take a head nodding. The number of head nods is an affirmative. Okay, that's about a 12:35. Okay, good. So if this group was going to take some recommendations forward to the different audiences that we would like to consider them, I mean, we're thinking here advice to government, advice at the ministry level, advice to boards, advice to corporates, advice to learners and teachers. I mean, there are a number of layers here in this system that we want to wrap around so ultimately learning experiences can be, safe and successful. What are the kinds of so what's pragmatic so what's that we would like to surface today? And I think everything's kind of being recorded here, isn't it, Paul? And I'll come to you as a wrap up. Did you just want to say something before we come over here?
Do you want to do?
Yes. So we're just going to take a few pragmatic so what's from the room. Yeah. Perfect. Where's the mic? Where's the second mic? Oh, you've got it. Over to here, first of all.
Sorry, me again. Something that actually Lucy touched on prior to this, which I think is a so what, and a thing that we need to be looking at, is the fact that we are implicitly, in some cases on behalf of our children, and sometimes it's even people who aren't their guardians who are on behalf of our children, are accepting the terms and conditions of services that are being prescribed by the ministry. And as yet, I don't think we've had any major explosions as a result of this, but I can see it, the kind of thing that will sink the entire educational IT system when Facebook decides to take one of your child's videos and use it as their global ad campaign for how cool Facebook is without your permission, because you've actually signed over the rights to that by virtue of clicking that thing that you didn't read when it says click I accept. And there's the implicit, basically you have no legal recourse. None of us have legal recourse to these things because we've accepted them. We just don't know we've accepted them because the ministry, for example, has delegated the responsibility down the tree and somebody has ticked I accept on behalf of students. We have to make sure that one of the recommendations I'd like to see us make is that we explicitly require the understanding of the implications of accepting these things to our parents, and that the ministry doesn't allow it to happen that children are entered into these things without that acceptance, understanding acceptance as opposed to implied acceptance.
Thank you. Further so what's that the room would like to recommend for any of the different interested parties that we have talked about today? Thank you for that, Dave, to kick us off. Further thoughts? Over here and then to Martin.
So I touched on it before, but I think one so what for me is that you can't rely on filtering and other sort of net nanny services to keep with the perception that that will keep your child safe. So although we will all want to wrap precautionary measures around our students' use, and particularly both at home. This happens to parents as well as, I guess, occasionally in school environments. But I think there has to be education campaigns right at the start around informing children on how to behave in an acceptable manner on the internet and what not to engage in as one so what.
Yes, and I think probably Martin might touch on that and build on that as well. Just telling you what to say there, pretty much.
Sorry, I'm actually also, just for the record, I'm really bad at multitasking. I've been trying to like tweet at the same time as follow the conversation. So if I suddenly say, "Look, Lance, that's not a problem," it's a crossover. What I was going to ask, actually, just as a sort of a prompt. Specifics. So, Dave, you mentioned that schools are signing things, and I know you mentioned Facebook, and I know that Google Apps for Educator is another thing that people often haven't. Are there specific services where you think, can we name names? Can we say that's a service that you're worried about? Yeah, and then perhaps, because the thing from our perspective, obviously NetSafe is in the business of deciding what creates actual harm, and then advising on ways to decrease harm, and trying to separate that from the noise of like the theory of what could cause harm. And so, as you quite rightly point out, we haven't had Facebook do something like that yet. I'm not saying they can't, and we haven't had Google do something bad with data yet. So,
I think I'm just. It's a great question, and what I want to just make sure we avoid is a kind of let's all name a lot of companies around the room, particularly the name of the company who's about to pay for your lunch. No, I'm just kidding. No such thing as a free lunch. But what I would encourage people to do, because I think the bigger question here is what is the risk, and I think our intuitive judgment of how risky certain behaviours and uses of technology are is. It's hard to judge how accurate our own judgment of risk is, but I would urge people in the Google Doc, if there are specific areas, specific platforms, specific apps that people want to flag as having a concern in response to Martin's particular question, to do it there rather than get into the detail, because I think we've got a few more so whats. I can see 1 or 2 hands going up that I just want to make sure we've heard from everyone before we finish. So over to you first, and then over here. Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner as well. I just thought not to pick on Facebook again, but just as an illustrator, and this isn't actually about them, but speaking as experience, from an inquiry that I remember receiving, a case where I know Facebook has standards around an age threshold below which you're not meant to open up a Facebook account, and that's sort of an attempt to try and protect children's privacy to some extent. But we received an inquiry, and it was in relation to a school which we were requiring students under that age to set up Facebook accounts as part of their curriculum. So even when you've got agencies, to the extent that they're trying to put in place some sort of measures such as they are to protect privacy, if you don't have a good understanding in the schools themselves and what students, and kids will see that and say, well, I'll just lie about my age because I want a Facebook account. So there definitely has to be a balance between, yes, we want to be using companies which are responsible, but if we're not educating kids and getting them on board with, we don't know what are good privacy practices, then it's a balancing act, really.
Yes, and there's a huge so what there in that particular story. I think we've got a question over here around schools themselves being informed and well educated about parameters and guidelines that exist.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I've been trying very hard to be as the last speaker as possible, because the group of us here, we are from University of Waikato. We are actually creating tools which are supposed to help return control to users of the internet. So we are trying to listen more than we talk, hence we want to refrain from speaking more. But I guess I can contribute a so what, which is with regards to creators of technologies. Sometimes the technology can be created, for example, in emails. How many of you have heard of PGP? Yeah, you see, PGP is around for lots of years, but not many people are using it because there's comments about it not being intuitive or convenient enough. So even if the technology is there or the capabilities are there, the so what is, will people still use it intuitively? Yeah, so that's one of the so what we're going to contribute. Yep.
Thank you. And over to Mark and then Angela.
Can I jump in first?
Oh, yes, sorry, Mark.
I was going to follow up from that, actually. Like, so do teachers know this stuff? Like, you do? So, I mean, do teachers,
some do.
you know, tell their students, you know, Wi-Fi is dangerous, you know, use SSL, you know, things like that? Like, maybe the teachers need to... Yeah, maybe I'm just trying to, as a so what, maybe you start at a base level where do the teachers know enough about information security to educate the students about, you know, these are the things you shouldn't do online, like choose complex passwords, you know, you need to avoid Wi-Fi, that kind of stuff.
Yes, capability, competency, and I think it's in pockets, that kind of knowledge. So here, and then down to Kimberly.
I'll be very quick. I'm just interested in how we can learn more about Ryan and his team's tools that can return power to users of the internet.
Have that. Do you want to...
Quick reply. We'll be having a session tomorrow, data control in cloud environments. Yeah.
Awesome.
We want to listen to all of you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Angela.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it comes down to the motivations versus the risks and challenges of any application online, and that comes down from the kids. If the motivation to do something and want to be on something is greater than the risks and challenges that are posed, they'll go on it, and as educators, I think we do the same. So the degree of information that teachers are putting out there is across a spectrum of very competent, informed, through to people who are really swimming and struggling to sort of stay afloat in all of the things that they are now in charge of putting into the classroom. My thing is, my agenda is, like in Canada, that we ought to, from the ministry down, have something in curriculum that's supported by policy, where every learner from early childhood to year 13 is taught a systematic and sustained program in the curriculum. I know it's adding another thing in, but in Canada they do it. So in terms of equity, every child has got some form of education around digital literacies, citizenship and safety online. In order to do that, you have to have staff who know what they're doing. So if it's in the policy and curriculum, more staff will be doing more of it and better.
Right. And I think, I'm just coming down here to Kimberly, I think there is the mandate for that to happen. I think what that could look like in a sustained and consistent way is not well understood across schools. There'll be pockets of that happening, but you're right, it's not consistent. Did you want to? Okay. All right. So I make it, it's just a few minutes past 12:30. Can I just double check? Is there anyone else in the room who hasn't yet had an opportunity to speak or make a contribution and who would like to? I'll practice my wait time. It's like Ferris Bueller. Anyone? Anyone? Question? Anyone? Anyone? All good? Okay. So there's been a few so whats and a few takeaways. So I'm just going to hand over to Paula to just wrap us up, and then that'll take us to the end of the session. But thank you.
Yeah, fantastic contributions from all of you. I've actually also gotten here some contributions that were put into the document before, so there were quite a few people that wanted to be here that couldn't be here, so you might hear some new stuff come up there. But some really big things coming through were student voice. Really making sure that we, making sure we look at the language that we use to ensure the conversations are accessible to them, really critical, and looking at, what do they know, what do they need to know, so students defining privacy for them, involving parents in the conversation, I think another really critical thing. So another thing that came up with, I think we heard it today as well, was digital permanence. Computers don't forget like people do. So maybe, we can look at some lesson plans and sort of wrap some lesson plans around that for in schools. Data loss, really important for, backing up data at all levels, teachers, students, schools. And also thinking about the pros and cons of cloud storage as well. Big data, need to ask who has control over the data. And again, this is that whole stakeholder So it really, really needs to have everybody on board. So some of the big questions, on privacy, and maybe having some debates and getting the kids to get together and actually have some debates around that. So critical thinking for them, so that they can look at the pros and cons themselves. So actually putting the power back into the students' hands to actually really generate it and think about it, rather than a top-down us. This is what you need to do. These are the tools you need to use. Actually, getting them to be empowered and thinking critically around that. So that there was those themes came out with students' right to data, and also the transparency about those terms and of service. How do they interpret that? I mean, we can't expect them to have any comprehension if they can't even understand it. I mean, a lot of schools don't understand it. So how do we do that? So I think a big thing here is actually looking at how we connect schools with the ministry, with NetSafe, and our wonderful people over here. That would be fantastic. So connecting all of these people together to make better solutions. So what I'd really like to see is if we can in the Google Doc, whoever is willing to, if you can actually put your contacts in there, because if we can connect beyond this, I think we can do some really, really meaningful work in this area. There was just a couple of things that came through, again, that weren't for people who couldn't be here. Laura Bell had talked about there's an open web application security project, so for teachers and students, so that's another resource. And reaching out to the security community, they're actually incredible people. So for schools to be, confident enough to reach out to them, maybe NetSafe can connect us there with them, and also helping some tools that we can use straight away. For example, Ghostery and Mozilla, there's tools out there. We just need to actually get those tools into schools. So and conferences as well. So KiwiCon. So there's lots and lots of people out there willing to help. It's actually, I think the big thing is how do we connect people? So I think that's a really, really good next step for us. Yeah.
That's great. So that's covered quite a few of the points that are in the shared Google Doc, and obviously that's got persistence after this session as well. And we've raised a whole bunch of issues and quite a lot of big so whats around the content for students, the technical capability around how we might manage this, and that need for the growth of capability around for educators, for school communities and students as well. I'd like to thank all of you for participating and sharing your thoughts respectfully, with great humour, with great intelligence. And I think these sessions can never solve particular issues, but I think they have surfaced quite a lot, including some quite significant implications at policy and government level as well. So, and I'm sure they were all watching. So I hope you, unless there's any final comments that people wanted to make, I will wrap this up for the sponsored lunch. And if you have further comments that you would like to make, the Google Doc continues there as well. I did mention earlier, and this isn't, I'm not selling anything here, but the Connected Learning Advisory that I mentioned earlier, which is a national service for schools, supporting schools to make decisions in this space. If you wanted to know more, I've put some stuff there for you. All right, thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch, everyone. Thank you.